selection. And when you're thinking of natural selection, you can think of this song, okay? Who is the person that gets to mate? Who's the person that gets to have the babies and pass on their genes? Well, you're not going to want to scrub, right? So, who's that person? The person that is good looking, the person that has the job. When we're thinking of humans, these are traits that people look for in their mate.
But when we look in nature at organisms that aren't human, finding a mate and reproducing, that's really what life is all about, right? We think of money and fame and popularity as being successful, but in nature, it's really just about reproducing. And so when scientists were trying to figure out how we got the variety of life that came to be, they weren't quite sure. How did we get all of this variety? And Charles Darwin is the one who kind of first started to make sense of variety.
Okay. So Charles Darwin was a naturalist, and he was credited with the theory of evolution. He actually sailed on this ship called the Beagle in 1831 to the Galapagos Islands.
And it's the idea of those islands. What's so special about the islands is there were different environments. So these are the islands off of the western coast of South America, and if you can see in this picture, there's lots of different islands.
So natural selection is the theory that organisms from a population are selected to survive based on the environment that they live in. And based on that, this can cause the new species to form, and that's called speciation.
So the big thing that we need to get here is that not all organisms are going to survive equally. If we have a population that has variation or different organisms, just like if you have a group of guys you're trying to pick from or girls, only some are going to be chosen. And it depends on who's doing the picking. So what I would choose in a mate may not be the same as what someone else would choose in a mate. And so that is natural selection. If we look at another example with Darwin's finches, the idea is that these birds actually came from the South American continent, and during a storm, they got blown across the ocean. They got off course, landed on these islands, and depending on the type of beak you had, you were more or less successful. So if you lived on an island with lots of leaves, this bird was the one that was most successful. These would die off. This would reproduce more, and all of a sudden, the environment, the fact that there were leaves, selected for who got to survive.
So in natural selection, there are four main components or four main parts to it. First, we have variation, and variation is when you have members of a population that are genetically different and therefore have different phenotypes. So look differently or have different traits on the outside. For overproduction means that we have more members in the population than the carrying capacity in the environment can support. Competition means that there's going to be something in the environment that favors that best suited phenotype at a specific point in time. And survival of the best adapted means that success is measured by the ability to pass on the genes in reproduction.
So when we look at these four steps, and we might want to put like a little bracket, and we're going to talk about how this is a process. Natural selection is a process. It doesn't happen immediately. If we look at this diagram at the top, we can see that this population has variation. The variation here is in the color, but you could have variation in size, you could have variation in many different traits. But the key is that the phenotypes are different, because the bird doesn't see your genes. The bird here sees the physical appearance, and for whatever reason, all of the birds are eating the green-colored beetles. So there was variation, more beetles than were going to survive competition. And what we need to add in here is that success is determined by a selecting factor, or selection force, meaning something in the environment is doing the choosing. Sometimes it's another organism, like a predator. Sometimes it's not. Like if it's really cold and the temperature is really low, the organism that has the best best traits to help keep it warm is the one that will survive. And it is all about being able to reproduce. And this leads to adaptations. We have to be really careful with this word because they are inherited. You can't wish and hope. So this little green beetle can't wish and hope to change to orange. It's a little different for humans because we're able to manipulate our environment more. But in nature, we're seeing the idea of variation, overproduction, competition, a selection force, choosing, and then survival of the best adapted. And this is the main idea that you don't get to wish for what you want in natural selection. We can see here another diagram that shows you, and this one's in your notes, but the idea is all about variation and reproduction.
So adaptations are inherited traits that help an organism survive in their environment and helps them mate, which is the key point of this, okay? Some adaptations you can have can be like structural adaptations, and that will be any physical form or part, such as the shape of your beak, or mimicry. Mimicry means that one organism, one species, is going to look similar to another, and that's going to help protect them.
So the example of mimicry that we have here is a king snake and a coral snake. Only one of these is poisonous. Poisonous organisms are usually really brightly colored. They don't want you to eat them and then die. They don't want you to eat them at all. And so we have actually evolved lots of animals to avoid brightly colored things because we know inherently or innately that they're dangerous. But we don't know which of these brightly colored ones also has a poison in its fangs. And so most animals are going to avoid both purposefully. The key is that these structures are going to help you better survive and mate. So if you look at this elk, it has these huge antlers which will help it fight something off. But guess what? Females really like those big antlers because that means you could defend me. And so we see this evolution or natural selection pattern of who's going to best mate.
Another adaptation would be behavioral. This is going to be any genetically controlled action, such as herding with your deer, or even growling with your lions and tigers. Okay.
And when you think of your dog or your cat, you don't teach them to do this. It is actually part of their genes, and it helps them better survive. So these are behaviors that help you better survive.
There are also physiological adaptations, so this is going to be your body processes. This is something like oxygen binding to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells.
Or it could be something like the presence of an enzyme. So we have enzymes that help us digest our food. That's a physiological adaptation. It helps us better survive.
When we're looking or studying natural selection, we can also look at fossil records. So fossils are any evidence of life that once existed on Earth. That can be bones, footprints, or actual patterns of evolution over time.
And so this is what's going to provide evidence for evolution. Now we're going to talk later that we can actually see evolution happen in some populations. Remember, if we're talking about reproduction, we have to be able to see lots of generations to actually see evolution. So it's not easy to see evolution in humans or plants. It's really easy to see evolution in bacteria. So we'll talk later about antibiotic resistance and how you can actually see a population of bacteria evolve. The key is, how do we know that evolution has occurred in animals? So we have three main types of evidence that we're going to look at. And the first is fossils. And it is evidence we are going to see patterns. For example, if we look at the horse and we compare it to a lot of other animals that are kind of similar, we can see similar bone structures. It is going to be difficult when we're looking at fossils because we have to be able to figure out how old the fossil is.
So when we're trying to figure out how old they are, we have two ways to do that. With relative dating, we're looking at the order of the appearance of the fossils in sedimentary rock. With radioactive dating, we're actually going to use the natural decay of isotopes in an organism.
And what relative dating is going to give us is a relative age or a range of ages. So we're not sure exactly how old it is, but we know that this one is older than that one. And I like to use the idea of a laundry basket. If you take off your clothes and put them right in the laundry basket, I could tell which clothes you wore before which. I wouldn't know what day you wore them, but I would know that you wore this one earlier in the week and this one later in the week. And that's what relative dating does. Radioactive should give us a pretty exact date. So when we say something is 3.6 billion years old, we did that through radioactive. We haven't really talked about what isotopes are. You don't really need to memorize how it works. Just the idea that some fossils will have a range of dates and others will know exactly how old they are. The next type of evidence is going to be biochemical evidence.
So biochemical evidence, this is when we're comparing DNA, RNA, or amino acid sequence in proteins. The more that you have that are similar, the more closely they're going to be related.
And we do want to identify that this one is actually the most reliable, because you really don't have to do any interpretation. They're either the same sequence or not the same sequence. There is some interpretation that will need to be done, but comparing DNA and RNA and amino acids will give us the most reliable information. And so the last type is anatomical evidence.
With anatomical evidence, we're going to look for homologous or the same structures, but they have different functions. So looking at our example.
So it's kind of hard when you look at an organism to know exactly what that structure means. When we look a little deeper at the bone, we can see that there's some similarities between a human, a whale, a dog, and a bat. They actually have one upper arm bone, two lower arm bones, and then a bunch of smaller bones. Now notice the bats is actually fairly different. But this is evidence that there was once a common ancestor. And so we do want to kind of add that in. Evidence of common ancestor. And we don't mean that there was once an organism that was part human, part whale, part dog, part bat. That's not what we mean. We mean that there was once a very different organism, perhaps here, that over time mutations took it into lots of different environments. And so they lived in different environments, used their structures differently, and the structures evolved or accumulated changes over time. So we'll talk a little bit more about what homologous structures mean, but it is evidence of a common ancestor.
Then we have what are called analogous structures. This means that they have the same function, but they have an actual different structure in how they're made.
And so what this is evidence of is not a common ancestor. So if we look at, or recent, let's add in the word recent common ancestor. If we look, for example, at, this is a butterfly, this is actually a pterodactyl wing, a bird wing, and a bat wing. If we look at all of these wings, the bird, the insect, doesn't have any bones at all. And so this is actually evidence that the wing is just helping them exist in an environment.
Following students have messages and student services. Brittany Stevens, Maria Almanza Nunez, Cody Klutz, Hernellen Salas Reyes, Alexander Severies, Alice Almonte,
And so they
Gloria
showed that it might
Abbott.
have been left
Please
over
go to
from
student
previous
services.
ancestors.
Following
Like
students,
there
please
was
come to the
an
front office. Brent Jenkins, Sasha
So we'll
Robinson,
go
Lori
over
Moffitt,
a little bit more
Michael
about
Wiley,
structures because
Austin
there's a
Mejia,
lot of information there.
Brittany Truax, Joanna Carvajal. Please come to the front office for messages. Also, Ashley Crichton.